Hello, I'm Joshua Farnsworth and welcome to my traditional woodworking school. In this video, my friend Elia Bizzari will show how to use a draw knife on a shaving horse to cut green wood into spindles. And this is part of his video on building Windsor chairs. Elia is a fantastic Windsor chair maker, so if you feel intimidated by the thought of making a Windsor chair out of green wood, don't feel intimidated because Elia shows step-by-step how to do it in our video that you can purchase. But yeah, sit back and enjoy this and go out and at least try using a draw knife and a shave horse to cut yourself some green wood. Thanks for watching.
I'm here at my shaving horse. I like to use a shaving horse with my draw knife. It's just like bread and butter. It's the perfect thing. Most of you probably know what a shaving horse is, but it's just a foot operated clamp here. You can, stick a piece of wood in between the jaws and it'll hold it for you, and then you release your foot in it, and it releases. So it's a really fast, efficient way of holding a piece of wood to shave it with a draw knife. Talk a little bit about a draw knife. This is my favorite one. I bought it for $5 at the tool meet a while ago, long time ago. It didn't have any handles. I turned some handles for it on a spring pole lathe and stuck them on there. What I like about it is that I like this profile. So it's got a nice thin blade out towards the edge. So it steps down like that, which I really like. It's the thinner the blade, the shorter the bevel you get, which means it'll get into concave surfaces, which isn't important for the spindles, but it's really nice for things like the seat and things like that. So I tend to use them beveled down. You can use them either which way, but if you're going to use it bevel up, the back cannot be dead flat, so you need to strop the back or something so it's slightly rounded so that you can come out of the cut. I tend to use it beveled down exclusively so I can keep the back flat, which makes it easier to sharpen. But depending on which way you intend to use it, the handles need to be cocked to match because you want your wrists straight. So when you're cutting like that, you don't want your wrists cocked. You want them ergonomic. So in this case, for a bevel down knife, you can see my handles are just slightly cocked in relationship to the blade there. So let's start shaving on some spindles here. Before we start shaving our spindles, I want to talk a little bit about how to get good grain direction in them, to get nice straight grain spindles. So we drew this little diagram here, and this down here is what ideally the pieces would have split out like, perfectly straight grain on both sides of the split. Up here, this side split out well, or maybe that's the bark side and naturally split, is parallel with the grain. But up here you can see that the split kind of ran diagonally across some fibers there. So this fiber here starts there and ends there. And this fiber starts here and is underneath that previous fiber and ends down there. So when we're shaving those spindles, we want to, what I would do is start shaving here and then take a marking gauge and mark up to here and then cut all that off so that now at least that section of the piece is parallel with the grain. So let me show you what that looks like in a real piece of wood here. Here's one that split out really well, and it looks like everything's running perfectly straight along the piece of wood. Here you can see these diagonal lines, and those are the ends of growth rings. That darker section there is the early wood layer, and then this lighter section is the late wood layer. Another early wood layer, another late wood layer. So that's this piece on this side has grain run out. So I wouldn't start shaving there. We'd come back to that side later. So I need to show you what that looks like on the radial side too, but let me just remind you what radial and tangential means. I know I've done a lot of talking since then. So the rays are these lines that run from the bark to the pith. So they're like spokes of a wagon wheel, and they run like that. The tangential plane is perpendicular to those rays, so it runs along the growth rings like that. So that's the tangential plane there. So this piece of wood that we split out came off of there like that. So you've got your ray planes running like that and your tangential plane there. Let me gently lay this on the ground. Thump. So we were just looking at the tangential plane with those diagonal lines like that. The ray plane looks a little bit different. So those diagonal lines are how you'd identify that in the tangential plane, whether the grain is running straight in the tangential plane. In the ray plane, it looks a little different. So yeah, couldn't see it with the light bouncing off. So here you can see the sides of the pores. So there's a pore there. And the lines are very long. The pore, you're looking at the side of the pores, and the lines are very long. Here, I've taken my draw knife and cut diagonally through those pores. So you can see very short lines. See how these pores are very short? They're just, because I sliced diagonally through them. So like a test tube, cut diagonally across the end of it. So this section is not parallel with the grain up till there, so all that would need some fixing. But up here, everything looks really nice. Just to make it a little easier to see before I start shaving here, I drew some lines on there to show what was going on. So you can see that this bark side is automatically parallel with the grain. So you can see how it's parallel with those lines drawn in there. But on this side, this line runs down here and it stops right there. That's the end of that growth ring. And then this next growth ring here comes down and is up underneath that first growth ring. And then it ends right here. It also ends right there. So this side is not parallel with the grain, but this side up here is. So I'm going to start up here and work on the side that is parallel with the grain first. With this bark, the first thing the guy at the log yard usually does is pick up your gorgeous log and dump it in a bucket of mud. So I try not to cut bark with my favorite draw knife. If I am going to do that, I try and sink it down below the bark as quickly as possible and then cut the bark straight off like that, so that I'm not cutting on that part of the bark that was dunked in the mud, potentially. So that's almost all I need to do there. I'm just gonna cut a little bit to clean up that surface, but that's really oops, I went a little bit deeper than I needed to there. So I'll take it all the way down so I'm parallel with the grain. And then I'm gonna flip it around and work back the other way, get that bark off, and then cut here. Oh, so here's something. You can see right here that I was tearing a little bit. So because I took a little bit more wood off than I expected down here, I'm actually cutting uphill here, which is not a bad thing. It actually provides valuable information. You can see these, how I know that it's tearing is you can see these white tear marks. There's one right there, and there's one right there. But you can see that it's fairly clean past that line down that way. So I don't need to cut past here, but I do need to cut some wood off of right there. So what I'm going to do is keep cutting in the direction it was tearing until it stops tearing. So that's all that took, and now that whole thing is nice and smooth there. So that means that I'm in one plane there. So I've got one side that I just shaved that's parallel with the grain. I need to create another adjacent side that's also parallel with the grain. And then from those two sides, I'll run my marking gauge and square up the piece. Okay, so now I'm just going to flip this around like that. So I've got this side that I already cleaned up, and I'm picking an adjacent side that's also more or less parallel with the grain. And I'm going to clean that up. I want to make this side perpendicular to that previous side, more or less. No need for tri-squares here, but just eyeball it square. All right, so there it's tearing a little bit with me. So I'm just going to keep cutting in that direction until it ceases to tear, right like that. And now I've got two adjacent corners that are clean and perpendicular to each other. So now I'm going to take my marking gauge. I like a marking gauge that's dull. Everybody else loves a sharp marking gauge. But if you use a sharp marking gauge for this, the line that you're drawing just folds back in on itself. So I like a nice dull one that'll leave a big hairy line like that. So you always want to make sure you're marking from the side you shaved. So my marking gauge fence here is riding up against this surface, which I've already Drawknifed. So now I'm going to flip this around this way so that I can put the other surface that I already Drawknifed up against that marking gauge fence and draw a line on that surface. So I'm always marking onto a surface that's Drawknifed, and I'm always putting a surface that's Drawknifed up against my fence. And if you do that, you can't go wrong. So now the second two sides are really easy. If you start on the ray plane side, you will have less work because you will have taken off more on the ray plane side than you will have on the tangential side. So it's just slightly less work. If that doesn't make any sense to you, just forget about it. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect the final chair at all, but it might save your sweaty brow a little bit. So now I'm just going to draw a knife down to that marking gauge line. If your marking gauge is dull enough, it will leave a nice hairy line that you can see when your draw knife gets down to it, and you don't even have to tip your head around to look at it. You just see this pile of fluff appear on the corner that you're cutting. So I've got that draw knife down to my marking gauge lines, and I'm going to flip it around and do the other side. All right, and so now I've got a square spindle. Now you'll notice at this end, it didn't make 3/4, so it's not square. It ran out to where it was thinner right there, but that's fine. The finished spindle is only 5/16 at this top end, so that won't be a problem at all.
If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking, come take a class at our school in Earlysville, Virginia. You can also visit our website at woodandshop.com, where you'll find a bunch of free woodworking lessons, workshop tours, and our very popular tool buying guides. And make sure you subscribe to our free newsletter to get our latest articles and videos. Enjoy!